America got richer, more educated, and more technologically advanced than any previous generation, yet happiness refused to follow. Between 1972 and today, real per capita GDP nearly doubled, climbing from roughly $25,000 to $48,000 inflation adjusted. College graduation rates nearly tripled. Homes filled with conveniences that would have seemed like science fiction in the 50s. And still, the numbers tell a quiet, stubborn story. In the mid-1970s, about 35% of Americans told the General Social Survey they were very happy. That figure has been drifting downward ever since, sitting around 24% today. More money, more degrees, more comfort. And people on the whole got less happy. The strange part is not simply that Americans in the 1970s reported higher levels of happiness. The real puzzle is that none of the things we were taught would guarantee a better life actually delivered on that promise. The more the country gained in material terms, the more the deeper sense of well-being slipped away. There was something deeper that was sustaining people back then, something money and technology could never replace. When that began to disappear, the happiness numbers never came back. In the mid-1970s, most Americans lived inside a much more locally contained world. People typically worked within a short drive of home. Children walked or biked to school and spent their afternoons playing outside with little supervision. Grocery shopping, errands, and weekend activities all happened within the same few miles. This smaller scale produced frequent, repeated contact with the same people at the gas station, the post office, the barber shop, and the corner store. Social connection required almost no planning or effort. Relationships formed naturally through regular proximity. Neighbors knew one another by name. Many men belonged to unions, churches, or fraternal organizations that met every week. Psychological research has shown that these kinds of low-effort, repeated face-to-face interactions reliably increase feelings of belonging and subjective well-being. That automatic background sense of being known appears to have been one of the main reasons happiness levels stayed higher during that era. Beneath those everyday routines lay a deeper system sociologists call social capital, dense networks of relationships, shared norms of reciprocity, and relatively high levels of generalized trust. In the 1970s, this system was still unusually strong. 70% of American men belonged to at least one formal organization. Churches, unions, fraternal lodges such as the Elks or Rotary or veterans groups. Each group met every week at the same time and place. Members paid annual dues, sat at the same tables, ate meals together, and worked on local charity projects. These were not casual affiliations. They created regular structured points of cooperation and mutual obligation. When people helped a neighbor, volunteered, or showed up for a meeting, there was a reasonable expectation the favor would eventually be returned. At the same time, generalized trust remained high. Roughly 58% of Americans agreed that most people can be trusted. This combination produced something rare, belonging that required almost no ongoing effort or emotional labor. People did not have to constantly work to maintain their social world or prove their value within it. The infrastructure did most of the work for them. Robert Putnam's research later showed that communities with higher social capital consistently reported greater individual well-being and life satisfaction, even after controlling for income and education. The 1970s still operated inside the tail end of that stronger architecture, and the General Social Survey happiness numbers appear to have been reflecting it. One of the most significant factors in the decline of that everyday social fabric came from an unexpected source. About 25% of the long-term decline in social capital traces back to the spread of television and other electronic entertainment. The largest share of that impact unfolded during the 1970s and 1980s as television sets became larger, cheaper, and more central to American homes. Robert Putnam's broader breakdown is revealing. He estimated that about 50% of the long-term decline in social capital stemmed from generational change. The gradual replacement of the World War II and Depression-era cohorts, who had formed strong habits of civic participation with younger generations who did not inherit the same bonding experiences. Another 25% he linked directly to television and electronic media, roughly 10% traced to suburbanization, longer commutes, and urban sprawl, while another 10% came from the rise of dual-career households and the resulting time pressure. The irony was hard to see at the time. For a time, the television had functioned as a shared focal point. Families gathered around it in the living room, but as average viewing hours increased, those hours began replacing other forms of interaction. Every additional hour spent watching meant one fewer hour spent at a lodge meeting, talking with neighbors, or hosting friends. The appliance that once brought people together quietly became one of the forces pulling them apart. The change felt incremental and harmless. A bigger TV, a more comfortable couch, another channel to choose from. No one framed it as a trade-off at the time, yet it marked the beginning of a quiet shift away from the face-to-face routines that had previously filled people's evenings and weekends. The erosion of that everyday social structure happened gradually, disguised as ordinary progress at every step. One of the most important forces was the continued expansion of suburban living that had accelerated after World War II and remained strong through the 1960s and 1970s. The interstate highway system, authorized in 1956, made longer-distance commuting practical. Combined with falling car prices and government-backed mortgages, it encouraged millions of families to move into new subdivisions built farther from city centers and workplaces. Between 1950 and 1970, the suburban population nearly doubled, reaching 74 million, and accounted for 83% of all U.S. population growth during that period. What many saw as the fulfillment of the American dream, larger homes, bigger yards, quieter streets, carried an unintended consequence. Neighborhoods designed around the automobile rather than the pedestrian. What had felt like better living quietly reduced the spontaneous contact that had once been routine. At the same time, the steady rise of dual-income households added new pressure on time. With both parents working outside the home, fewer hours remained for lodge meetings, neighborhood gatherings, or volunteering. These shifts slowly drained participation from the organizations and routines that had held daily life together. Membership in long-standing fraternal groups reversed decades of steady growth. Union membership fell sharply. PTA involvement was cut roughly in half. Volunteer numbers dropped 26% in the Boy Scouts and 61% in the Red Cross. What television had started, shifting leisure time toward home-centered entertainment, the arrival of the internet and digital media finished. Social life moved from physical neighborhoods and organizations into screens. By 2020, Americans were eating more than half their meals alone. The real predictor of happiness in those years was never income or education. It was belonging, the simple recurring sense that you were part of something larger than yourself, and that your presence mattered in ordinary places. This belonging did not come from self-improvement or intentional networking. It was the default setting of daily life. You had a seat at the same Thursday night lodge meeting, where the same men expected you to show up. The same families gathered on the same block for summer cookouts year after year. The barber, the corner grocer, the union steward, and the church deacon all knew your name without being asked. These were not friendships you had to schedule. They were relationships that formed automatically because the physical and social infrastructure of the 1970s made repeated low-effort contact almost unavoidable. That infrastructure reached its peak in the early 1970s and has been steadily dismantled ever since. We traded it for convenience, for larger homes farther from everyone else, for entertainment that required no one else's participation, and eventually for digital spaces that simulate connection without any of the friction or accountability that real community demands. GDP doubled, trust halved, and the surveys kept recording the same quiet decline. What disappeared was not just time with other people. It was the background assurance that other people were there, consistently and without effort, ready to notice if you were missing. If you enjoy these deep dives into everyday life from that era, please Please like the video and subscribe.